welcome to Void Case Files. I'm your host, and tonight we're diving into one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Texas law enforcement history. Before we begin, if you're enjoying these deep dives into the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button below. We're pushing hard to reach 1,000 subscribers by the new year, and we need your help to get there. We're committed to bringing you daily videos, real cases, real terror and mysteries that still haunt the people who investigated them. Now, let's get into tonight's story. My father was a detective in Madison County, Texas, and there's one case from 1987 that he's never been able to forget. For 37 years, he refused to talk about it. But recently, he finally agreed to share what happened along that lonely stretch of old San Antonio Road, a historic trail that's seen centuries of death, but nothing quite like this. This isn't about a serial killer or a cult. This is about something that defied every rational explanation he'd been trained to rely on. Something that left evidence but no answers. Something that made experienced lawmen question everything they thought they knew about the world. This is the old San Antonio Road incidents. Henry Morrow grew up in Madisonville, Texas, in a small house where the railroad tracks met Farm Road 90. His father worked at the grain elevator. His mother taught second grade at the elementary school. Henry was the kind of kid who took things apart to see how they worked, who asked too many questions, who needed to understand the mechanics of everything around him. That curiosity led him to law enforcement. He believed that every crime had a logical explanation, that evidence always told a story if you were patient enough to read it. By 1987, he'd been with the Madison County Sheriff's Department for 14 years. He'd investigated thefts, assaults, 2 homicides, countless domestic disputes. He thought he'd seen everything his small corner of Texas had to offer. He was 42 years old, married to his high school sweetheart Linda, father to 2 daughters who were just starting to realize their dad's job was different from other kids' fathers. Henry was known around the department as steady, methodical, someone who didn't jump to conclusions. Sheriff Hodges once said Henry could find a needle in a haystack just by being too stubborn to quit looking. That stubbornness was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. The old San Antonio Road isn't much to look at during the day. It's a 2-lane highway that cuts through some of the most isolated country in central Texas, rolling prairie dotted with oak groves and cattle ranches that have been in the same families for generations. The road itself is older than Texas, older than America. It started as an Indian trail, became El Camino Real de los Tejas, when Spanish missionaries used it to travel between missions in the early 1700s. By the time Texas became a republic, the road was already ancient, worn into the earth by centuries of feet, hooves, and wagon wheels. It runs along the boundary between Madison, Robertson, and Brazos counties, 3 jurisdictions that have always been more cooperative than competitive. The ranchers out there know each other, help each other during calving season, share equipment when someone's tractor breaks down. It's the kind of place where people still wave when they pass each other on the road, where a handshake means something. During the day, it's beautiful in that sparse Texas way, all big sky and bigger horizon. But at night, the old San Antonio Road becomes something else entirely. There are no streetlights, no gas stations, no all-night diners. Just darkness that seems to press in from all sides, broken only by the occasional porch light from a ranch house set back from the road. Henry had driven that stretch hundreds of times over the years, usually on his way to fishing spots on the Navasota River. He'd never given it much thought. It was just a road. Friday, April 24th, 1987. Henry was finishing up paperwork on a burglary case when the call came in at 7:15 in the evening. Dale Hutchinson owned the Circle H Ranch, about 6 miles west of the tiny community of Midway. Dale was 63, had been ranching that land since before Henry was born. He wasn't the type to panic, wasn't the type to call law enforcement unless something was seriously wrong. The dispatcher said Dale's voice was shaking when he called. "Something's killed my cattle. All of them. You need to see this." Henry grabbed his partner, Deputy Frank Collier, and they headed out. Frank was 28, married just 2 years, already had a baby girl with another on the way. He was good police, the kind of deputy who remembered people's names and asked about their families. Henry liked working with him. They made the drive in Frank's usual style, 5 miles over the speed limit, classic rock on the radio turned down low. Neither of them talked much. Both of them were probably thinking the same thing. Coyotes, maybe a pack of feral dogs. It happened sometimes, though usually not to healthy adult cattle. The sun was setting when they pulled up to Dale's gate, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been pretty under different circumstances. Dale was waiting for them, leaning against his truck. Even from a distance, Henry could see something was wrong. Dale's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he pushed the gate open. "In all my years, detective," Dale said as Henry stepped out of the patrol car, "I ain't never seen nothing like this." His voice cracked on the last word. They climbed into Dale's truck and he drove them to the back pasture without another word. The truck bounced over ruts worn into the earth by decades of use. Dale's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Henry noticed he kept swallowing like he was trying not to be sick. When they crested the small rise that overlooked the back 40, Dale stopped the truck and pointed. "Down there." Henry saw the cattle immediately. 11 of them, Herefords, red bodies with white faces. But they weren't scattered across the pasture the way dead cattle usually were. They were arranged in a perfect circle, maybe 40 feet across. Every single one of them was facing inward, toward the center of the circle, like they'd all been staring at something when they died. Frank let out a low whistle. "That ain't natural." "No," Henry agreed. "It sure as hell isn't." They approached on foot, and that's when Henry smelled it. Not the smell of death he'd encountered at other scenes, that sweet, rotting smell that gets into your clothes and hair. This was chemical, sharp, like burnt copper mixed with battery acid. It made his sinuses burn and his eyes water. The grass around the circle was completely undisturbed. No tire tracks, no footprints except for Dale's boot prints leading to and from his truck. The cattle looked wrong. Their bodies were sunken, collapsed inward like something had sucked all the fluid out of them. Their hides hung loose over prominent bones. Their eyes were clouded over, completely white, staring at nothing. Frank circled around to the far side, examining each animal. Henry watched where he stepped, documenting everything with the camera he'd grabbed from the patrol car. He'd learned early in his career that you could never take too many photos. Details you missed at the scene might show up in pictures later. "Henry," Frank called out. His voice had gone tight. "You're going to want to see this." Henry joined his partner. Frank was crouched next to one of the cows, pointing at its head. The tongue. Look at the tongue. The cow's mouth hung open. The tongue was gone. Not ripped out, not chewed away by scavengers. Removed. The cut was clean, precise, almost surgical. There was no blood on the ground beneath the animal's head, no blood on its muzzle. Henry had seen plenty of predator kills. Coyotes tore meat. They left tracks, disturbed grass, scattered evidence of feeding. This was nothing like that. They checked the other animals. Every single one had its tongue removed in exactly the same way. 3 of them had additional mutilations, reproductive organs removed with the same impossible precision, perfect circular cuts that looked like they'd been made with a scalpel or laser. There was no blood anywhere. Dale stood by his truck, arms crossed tight against his chest. "They was fine this morning at 6, he said. "I checked on them same as always. They was grazing right here, healthy as could be. Came back this evening to bring them to the near pasture for the night, and I found them like this." Dale's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Couldn't have been more than 10, 12 hours. Henry pulled out his radio and called for the county coroner and Dr. Gerald Rains, the veterinarian who handled most of the livestock cases in the area. Then he and Frank spent the next hour documenting everything, measuring the circle, photographing each animal from multiple angles, checking the surrounding area for any trace of evidence. They found nothing. No shell casings, no footprints, no vehicle tracks, no disturbed earth. It was like the cattle had simply fallen over dead, arranging themselves in a perfect circle as they did. Dr. Rains arrived just after 9, pulling up in his white truck with the dented fender. He was 56, stocky, with calloused hands and a direct manner that Henry appreciated. Rains had spent 30 years treating everything from prize bulls to backyard chickens. If there was a livestock disease or injury he hadn't seen, it probably didn't exist. He pulled on a pair of gloves and spent 20 minutes examining the first animal, checking its eyes, opening its mouth, palpating its abdomen, making small incisions to check internal structures. Finally, he stood up, pulled off his gloves, and looked at Henry with an expression that Henry had never seen on the vet's face before. Complete bafflement. "This animal has been completely drained of blood," Rains said. "Not just drained. There's zero blood content in the circulatory system. The internal organs are shriveled like they've been desiccated, but they're intact. No ruptures, no disease markers. The body temperature is 15 degrees colder than it should be, even accounting for estimated time of death. The ambient temperature is 68 degrees, but this animal's body temp is 49. "Could it be poison?" Frank asked. Rains shook his head. "I've never seen a poison that works like this. And you'd see different symptoms, convulsions, foam around the mouth, discharge. These animals look like every drop of fluid was pulled out of them." "What could do that?" Henry asked. Dr. Rains looked out at the circle of dead cattle, then back at Henry. "I genuinely have no idea, Detective. This is something I can't explain. They worked until 2 in the morning, setting up portable floodlights, taking samples, making notes. The chemical smell never faded. If anything, it seemed to get stronger as the night wore on. By the time Henry drove home, his head was pounding and his throat felt raw. He lived on the east side of Madisonville, a modest house with a front porch where Linda liked to sit in the evenings. The lights were off when he pulled into the driveway. He sat in his car for a few minutes, trying to process what he'd seen. 11 cattle, perfect circle, no blood, no evidence. He'd been a detective for 14 years. He'd worked cases that took months to solve, cases with minimal evidence and uncooperative witnesses, but he'd always found answers eventually. This felt different. This felt like staring at something that shouldn't exist. Inside, he checked on his daughters. Rachel, 12, sprawled across her bed with a book fallen open on her chest. Amy, 9, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. Normal kids in a normal house, protected from the things their father saw. He wanted to keep it that way. In the bedroom, Linda stirred when he climbed into bed. "You okay?" she murmured. "Yeah," he said. "Just a long night." He didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those white eyes staring at nothing, saw that perfect circle of death. Saturday morning, Henry was at the Madison County Library when it opened at 9. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, knew him from his previous research on old property records. He asked her where the newspaper archives were kept. She showed him to the back room where bound volumes of the Madisonville Meteor went back to the 1940s. He started with 1980 and worked backward. It took him 3 hours to find the first article, September 1979. 9 cattle found dead on the old Wheeler property near Wheelock. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs. Local authorities investigating mysterious cattle deaths. No suspects. No further updates in subsequent editions. Henry kept searching. May 1968. 13 cattle on a ranch in Robertson County. Same brief article, same lack of follow-up. Then he found the oldest one. July 1952. 7 cattle near Normandy. Rancher quoted as saying the animals looked like they'd been bled dry. No arrests were ever made. Henry sat back in the wooden chair, surrounded by dusty volumes of small-town news. 3 incidents over 35 years. Now 4, counting his. All within 20 miles of the old San Antonio Road. All unsolved, all forgotten. He copied the articles by hand, filling a small notebook with dates and details. When he left the library, the bright sunshine felt wrong somehow, like the world should be darker to match what he was learning. Monday morning brought another call. This one came through Sheriff Kemper in Robertson County. "Henry, we've got a situation at the Patterson Ranch. 17 chickens, all dead. My deputy says it looks like your cattle case." Henry and Frank drove to Robertson County, crossing the county line just west of the old San Antonio Road. The Patterson Ranch was smaller than the Circle H, a family operation with chickens, goats, and a few head of cattle. The Pattersons met them at the house, a middle-aged couple who looked like they hadn't slept. The chickens were in the back, arranged in the same circular pattern Henry had seen on Friday. They were completely drained, weightless when he picked one up. That same chemical smell hung in the air. Mrs. Patterson started crying. "Those were my laying hens," she said. I've had some of them for 4 years. They were healthy yesterday. Frank took photos while Henry interviewed the Pattersons. Neither of them had heard or seen anything unusual. No vehicles on the property, no strangers in the area. Nothing that might explain this. When they left, Mrs. Patterson was still crying, and her husband was standing in the yard staring at the dead birds like he could will them back to life. Wednesday, April 29th. Henry was sound asleep when his phone rang at 2:35 in the morning. He fumbled for it in the dark, his heart already racing. Morrow. Detective, this is dispatch. We got an anonymous call about 2 minutes ago. Male voice. Very calm. He said, and I quote, "It's happening at the Brennan place right now." Then he hung up. We tried to call back, but there was no answer. The Brennan dairy farm. Henry knew it. Abandoned 3 years ago when old man Brennan died and his kids moved to Houston. The property sat empty, slowly falling apart, the herd long since sold off. Except it wasn't empty anymore. Someone had moved cattle back onto the property without permission, probably a rancher using the empty pasture for overflow. Henry was dressed and out the door in 3 minutes. He picked up Frank on the way, and they made the 18-minute drive in 12, Frank's truck pushing 80 on the dark highway. When they pulled up to the Brennan place, everything looked deserted, just dark buildings silhouetted against the night sky. They grabbed flashlights and moved toward the barn. That's when they saw them. 14 dairy cows in the near pasture. Henry's flashlight beams swept across the scene. The bodies were still warm. Not just warm, hot to the touch when he pressed his hand against one. These animals had died within the last hour, maybe less. The arrangement was the same, the condition was the same, the chemical smell was the same. But this time they'd arrived while the scene was fresh. Movement caught Frank's eye. Someone was running from the barn toward the old equipment shed. "Stop! Police!" Frank shouted, already moving. They chased the figure through the darkness, flashlight beams bouncing. Whoever it was, they were fast, dodging around rusted machinery and collapsed fence posts. Finally, they cornered him at the old grain silo. The man's voice came from inside, high and frightened. "Don't shoot, please. I didn't do nothing. I called you." It took 30 minutes of talking before he came out. His name was Leonard Pierce, 63 years old, weathered face and hand that shook like he had palsy. He'd been squatting in the barn for the past 3 weeks, ever since he got laid off from a construction job in Bryan. "I seen it," Leonard kept saying. "I seen what done this." "What did you see?" Henry asked, keeping his voice calm. Leonard's eyes were wide, darting around like he expected something to emerge from the shadows. "The cows started making noise," he said. "About 1:30, maybe 1:45. Real agitated, you know, lowing and moving around. So I went to the window to see what was bothering them." He paused, licked his lips. There was something out there with them, something tall, real tall, taller than any man I ever seen. Had to be 9, 10 feet at least. But it wasn't right, wasn't solid. You ever see heat waves coming off hot asphalt in summer? How the air kind of shimmers and you can't quite focus on what's beyond it? It was like that, except it was the thing itself doing the shimmering. "What do you mean it wasn't solid?" Frank asked. Leonard struggled for words. It was there, but it was also not there, like it was halfway between being real and not being real. And it didn't walk, it just moved. 1 second it was by the fence, next second it was in the middle of the herd. But there was nothing in between. No steps, no transition. It was just there, then there, then there. "What happened to the cows?" Henry asked. "They started dropping," Leonard said, "one at a time as it got near them, just collapsed like someone cut their strings. And there was a sound, high-pitched but quiet, like when you're near power lines and you hear that hum. Made my teeth hurt, made my head feel like it was full of bees." Leonard wrapped his arms around himself. The thing, it turned toward me. I don't even know how I knew it was looking at me, because I couldn't see any eyes or face or anything, but I knew. And when it did, I felt cold. Not just regular cold, but cold like I'd been dumped in ice water. Cold that went straight through to my bones. So I ran to the house, found the phone still worked, called the sheriff, and then I hid in that silo. Been there for over an hour, too scared to come out. Frank caught Henry's eye, gave a small shake of his head. He thought Leonard was crazy or lying. But Henry wasn't so sure. The fear in Leonard's eyes seemed too genuine, too raw. and there was something about the details that matched what they were seeing, the arrangement of the bodies, the timing, the freshness of the scene. They took Leonard back to Madisonville, got a formal statement, arranged for him to stay at the county's emergency shelter. Before they left him, Leonard grabbed Henry's arm. "You believe me, don't you, detective?" Henry didn't know how to answer that. "Get some rest," he said instead. "We'll talk more in the morning." Over the next 2 weeks, the incidents continued with increasing frequency. May 2nd, 8 goats on a small farm in Madison County. The owner found them at dawn, called Henry in tears. These weren't just livestock to her, they were pets, each one with a name. May 5th, 23 cattle in Robertson County. Sheriff Kemper stopped pretending this was normal. "We need help, Henry. This is beyond us." May 10th, 15 pigs in Brazos County. The rancher who found them, a man named Earl Thompson who'd been raising pigs for 30 years, quit and moved to Oklahoma within a week. Told his neighbors he wasn't going to wait around to be next. The local papers started covering the story. Rural mystery plagues, Tri-County area. Livestock deaths baffle authorities. Henry's phone started ringing at all hours. Reporters wanting quotes, ranchers wanting protection, concerned citizens demanding action. The sheriff formed a task force with Robertson and Brazos counties, 10 deputies total, Henry as lead investigator. They set up surveillance on vulnerable ranches, rotating 12-hour shifts. They patrolled the old San Antonio road at night, spotlights scanning the pastures. It didn't help. The incidents continued, always when no one was watching, always leaving the same inexplicable evidence. Linda started asking questions. "You're not sleeping," she said one morning at breakfast. "You barely eat. What's going on with this case?" "It's complicated," Henry said. She gave him a look that said she knew he was holding back. "Just be careful, okay? Whatever this is, it's not worth making yourself sick over." But Henry couldn't let it go. Every new incident felt personal, like whatever was doing, this was taunting them, proving it could act with impunity, that all their surveillance and patrols meant nothing. Friday, May 15th. Full moon. Henry had a theory, not based on science, but on the pattern he'd noticed. The incidents seemed to cluster around full moons, though not exclusively. He convinced the task force to conduct coordinated stakeouts across 6 properties, 10 deputies spread thin but covering the most vulnerable locations. Henry chose the old Whitfield property for himself and Frank. It was abandoned, but still had about 300 head of cattle that a neighboring rancher was using the pasture for. The property sat right along the old San Antonio road, isolated, perfect for whatever was hunting out here. They set up on a hilltop overlooking the main pasture, Henry's truck positioned to give them a clear view. They had shotguns, binoculars, cameras, thermoses of coffee, sandwiches Linda had packed. The sun set at 8:45. The sky went from blue to orange to purple to black, and the stars came out brighter than they ever seemed in town. Frank talked about his daughter, how she'd just learned to say Dada, how his wife was already talking about having a 3rd kid, even though the second one was still in diapers. Normal conversation to pass the time. Henry only half listened. He was watching the cattle, noting their patterns, the way they grazed in loose groups, the occasional low from a cow calling to her calf. Hours passed. They checked in with the other units every 30 minutes, everyone reporting the same thing. Nothing happening, nothing to see. At 11:20, Frank stopped mid-sentence. "You feel that?" he asked. "Feel what?" "It's cold. It wasn't cold 5 minutes ago." Henry checked the thermometer he'd clipped to the dashboard. 54 degrees. It had been 68 at the last check, just 20 minutes earlier. "That's not right," Frank said, rubbing his arms. "That's a 15-degree drop in 20 minutes. Henry sat forward, scanning the pasture below. The cattle were moving differently now. They weren't grazing anymore. They were bunching together, pressing close like they did when a storm was coming. But the sky was clear, full of stars, no storm anywhere near them. The radio crackled to life. Deputy Russell Hayes' voice came through, but it was distorted, wrong somehow. There was static, something at the Keller Ranch. The air more static, it looks wrong it. Then nothing but screaming feedback that made Frank jerk the radio away from his ear. Henry grabbed it. "Russell! Russell! Come back! Nothing! Just dead air." Frank reached for the ignition. "We need to. "Wait," Henry said, grabbing his arm. "Look." Down in the pasture, something was happening. The air itself seemed wrong, like looking through old glass that wasn't quite flat. A shimmer, a distortion. And it was tall, impossibly tall. 10 feet at minimum, maybe 12. Henry's eyes tried to focus on it and couldn't. Every time he thought he had it in focus, it seemed to shift, to be somewhere else, to be both there and not there. "Jesus Christ," Frank whispered. "What the hell is that?" The thing moved through the herd without walking. One moment it was near the eastern fence. The next moment it was in the center of the cattle. No transition, no movement between the 2 points. It simply existed in one location, then existed in another. The cattle began to fall. One by one they simply collapsed. Their legs buckled and they went down, always facing inward, always toward the thing. Henry could see it even from the hilltop, the way they were forming that terrible circle. "We need to go," Frank said. His voice had gone high, tight. Russell might be hurt. Every instinct Henry had developed over 14 years told him to stay in the truck, to not go near that thing in the pasture. But Russell was his responsibility, a deputy under his command. He grabbed the radio. All units converge on Keller Ranch. Officer may be in distress. He started the truck. As they pulled away, Henry looked back one last time. The thing was still there, surrounded by falling cattle. And then it turned. Henry couldn't see eyes or a face or anything that should be able to turn, but he knew with absolute certainty that it was looking at them, looking directly at them, and the cold that washed through him had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was a cold that came from inside, from some primal part of his brain that recognized a predator when it saw one. Frank drove fast, pushing the truck to 70 on the dark highway. The radio was useless, just static on every channel. They could see headlights from other patrol cars converging from different directions. The Keller Ranch appeared ahead, and they could see Russell's patrol car sitting on the access road, door hanging open, headlights still on. Frank slammed on the brakes and they were out and running before the truck fully stopped. "Russell!" Henry shouted. Frank swept his flashlight across the pasture. Nothing moved except grass in the night breeze. They found Russell 200 yards from his car. He was sitting on the ground with his back against a fence post, staring straight ahead. His eyes were open but unfocused, and he didn't react when Henry called his name. "Frank, call for an ambulance." Frank ran back to the truck while Henry knelt beside Russell. The deputy's skin was ice cold. His lips had a bluish tint. "Russell, can you hear me? Talk to me, buddy." Nothing. Russell just stared at nothing, breathing shallow, not even shivering despite the cold. The other deputies arrived, 4 of them, spreading out to search the area. They found the cattle 10 minutes later, 21 of them arranged in that now familiar circle. But this time there was something new. The grass inside the circle was wrong, not burned, not trampled, crystallized. When Henry knelt to touch it, the grass crumbled under his fingers like it had been frozen and shattered. He pulled the thermometer from his pocket, laid it on the ground. 32 degrees. The ground everywhere else was still above 70. The chemical smell was overwhelming, making his eyes water and his throat close up. The ambulance arrived and loaded Russell onto a stretcher. The EMTs reported his core body temperature at 94 degrees, mild hypothermia. No visible injuries, no explanation for his condition. They transported him to Madison County Hospital. Henry rode with him, watching the deputy's unfocused eyes, wondering what he'd seen. Russell didn't speak for 3 days. He lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, not responding to questions from doctors or visitors. On the 3rd day, Henry came by during evening visiting hours. The room was quiet except for the beep of monitors. Henry pulled up a chair beside the bed. Russell's eyes shifted to look at him. "You want to tell me what happened?" Henry asked quietly. Russell's voice came out as a whisper. "I saw it. Same thing the old man described. But I got out of my truck. Thought I was supposed to investigate, right? That's the job. So I walked toward it with my flashlight and my weapon drawn." He paused, swallowed hard. "It looked at me, Henry. I know that doesn't make sense because I couldn't see any eyes or face, but it looked at me and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, felt like drowning in ice water while someone held my head under. Every part of my brain was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't make my legs work, couldn't make anything work. Russell's hands were shaking. It came closer, got within maybe 10 feet of me. The sound, that high-pitched whine the old man talked about, it was so loud up close, like my skull was going to crack open, like my brain was going to leak out my ears. And the cold, God, the cold. I've never felt anything like it. Then it was just gone. 1 second it was right there, the next second nothing, like it had never existed. "What did you do?" Henry asked. "I walked back to the fence," Russell said. "Sat down, waited for you. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up here." He looked at Henry with haunted eyes. "Don't go after it, Henry. Whatever it is, we can't fight it. We're not equipped for this. This isn't something that belongs in our world." Monday, May 18th. Henry was in his office reviewing witness statements when Sheriff Hodges knocked on his door. "We've got visitors," the sheriff said. His expression was carefully neutral, which meant he wasn't happy. 2 Texas Rangers were waiting in the conference room. The lead ranger was Captain Wayne Hollister, a tall man in his 50s with a grey moustache and eyes that looked right through you. His partner was Ranger Dale Pritchett, younger, quieter, taking notes while Hollister talked. "We're here to take over your investigation," Hollister said without preamble. "This matter has implications beyond local jurisdiction." "This is my case," Henry said, "my county, my witnesses." "Not anymore," Hollister replied. "We've been authorized by the state to assume control of this investigation. You'll turn over all evidence, all witness statements, all photographs and samples you've collected." The sheriff gave Henry a look that said, "Don't argue." Henry argued anyway. "My deputies have been working this case for 3 weeks. We have relationships with the witnesses, knowledge of the area. You can't just walk in and—" "Yes, detective, we can," Hollister interrupted. "And we are. You can either cooperate or you can be removed from law enforcement entirely. Your choice." Henry cooperated because he had no other option. But that night, he went home and made copies of everything, every photograph, every statement, every note he'd written. He hid them in a box in the back of his closet behind Linda's winter clothes. If the Rangers were going to bury this, at least there would be a record that it happened. The Rangers worked quickly and quietly. They confiscated all the physical evidence, interviewed the witnesses again without local law enforcement present, and spent 2 weeks conducting their own investigation that they shared with no one. Henry tried to stay involved, but he was shut out at every turn. Even Sheriff Hodges couldn't get information from them. On June 3rd, the Rangers held a press conference. Captain Hollister stood at a podium in front of television cameras and reporters and read from a prepared statement. "After thorough investigation, we have determined that the cattle deaths in Madison, Robertson, and Brazos counties were the result of natural predation and scavenging behaviors. There is no evidence of foul play, no evidence of unusual circumstances, and no ongoing threat to livestock or public safety. This case is now closed." The ranchers were furious. They knew what they'd seen, knew it wasn't predation, but what could they do? The state had spoken. The case was closed. Move along, nothing to see here. Deputy Russell Hayes took medical leave in early June. Henry visited him at his house, found him packing boxes. "I'm moving," Russell said, "taking the family to Oklahoma. Got a cousin who runs a hardware store, says he can give me a job." "You're just going to leave?" Henry asked. "What else am I supposed to do?" Russell turned to face him. "I can't be here anymore, Henry. Can't drive past the Keller Ranch without my hands shaking. Can't sleep without seeing that thing in my dreams. My wife says I wake up screaming. My kids are scared of me. I have to get out." Russell left in August. Henry tried calling a few times, but Russell never answered. In September, a letter arrived, just a few lines. "Don't contact me again. Forget everything that happened. For your own good, and mine." That was the last Henry ever heard from Russell Hayes. Leonard Pierce, the drifter who'd witnessed the thing at the Brennan farm, disappeared in late May. The shelter reported he'd left one morning and never came back. Someone found his belongings in an abandoned trailer on the outskirts of Normandy. A few clothes, a broken watch, and a note written on the back of a McDonald's receipt in shaky handwriting. "It knows I saw it. It came back." The note was dated May 23rd, 2 days before Leonard vanished, no one ever saw him again. Henry filed a missing persons report, but without family pushing for an investigation, it went nowhere. Just another drifter who moved on. Except Henry didn't think Leonard had moved on. He thought Leonard had seen something he shouldn't have, and that something had come back for him. The case was officially closed, but Henry couldn't close it in his mind. He found himself driving past the Circle H Ranch, past the Brennan farm, past all the sites where the incidents had occurred, looking for what he didn't know. Answers, maybe. Or just confirmation that it had really happened, that he hadn't imagined the whole thing. Linda noticed the changes. He drank more, usually bourbon, alone in the garage after everyone went to bed. He insisted on leaving lights on throughout the house at night, said it was for security, but Linda knew better. He took different routes to work, longer routes that avoided the old San Antonio road. He woke up gasping in the middle of the night, sheets soaked with sweat, unable to articulate the dreams that haunted him. His daughters noticed too. The youngest, Amy, asked Linda one night why Daddy seemed so sad all the time. Linda didn't have an answer for her. August 9th, 1987. Henry wasn't called when it happened, but he heard about it from Sheriff Kemper. 14 cattle at a ranch near Wheelock, all dead, arranged in a circle. The rangers arrived within hours, had the scene processed and cleared by morning. Official cause of death, lightning strike. Never mind that there hadn't been a storm. Never mind that the wounds were identical to all the previous incidents. Lightning strike, case closed. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. No more incidents, no more circles of death. Whatever had been hunting along the old San Antonio road simply disappeared. August turned to September, September to October. Ranchers slowly relaxed their guard. Life returned to something like normal, though the events of that spring were not forgotten. They just weren't discussed. An unspoken agreement that some things were better left alone. Henry kept working, investigated burglaries and assaults, domestic disputes and the occasional theft. Normal crimes with normal explanations. But he was different now, and everyone could see it. The methodical detective who believed in evidence and logic had encountered something that defied both. It changed him in ways that never quite healed. He worked for the Madison County Sheriff's Department for another 14 years, retiring in 2001 after 28 years of service. There was a small party, a plaque, handshakes from colleagues. Then it was over. He was 56 years old and didn't know what to do with himself. Linda suggested they travel, see the country, do all the things they'd talked about but never had time for. They made it as far as New Mexico before Henry decided he didn't want to go back. There was a small house for sale in Albuquerque, affordable far from Texas. They bought it, told their daughters they were making a fresh start. The truth was simpler. Henry couldn't live near the old San Antonio road anymore. Couldn't risk driving past it. Couldn't risk remembering. Linda died in 2012 from cancer. Ovarian, aggressive, gone within 6 months of diagnosis. Their daughters came for the funeral, stayed a few days, then went back to their own lives in Dallas and Houston. They didn't visit often. Henry suspected they found him difficult, this sad old man living alone in the desert, surrounded by memories he wouldn't discuss. He was 79 now, living on a pension and Social Security, filling his days with crossword puzzles and bad television. But he still kept the box, the one from his closet in Madisonville, the one he'd hidden behind Linda's winter clothes and brought with him to New Mexico. It sat in his garage now, on a shelf behind paint cans and old tools. Sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd take it down and look through the contents. Photographs of cattle arranged in perfect circles. Leonard's note with its terrified scrawl. Russell's original statement, the one he gave before the rangers made him recant. Temperature readings that made no sense. Chemical analysis reports that identified nothing. Evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Henry had also developed a habit over the years. He monitored news from Madison, Robertson, and Brazos counties. Online now, easier than driving to the library. He set up Google alerts for cattle deaths, unexplained livestock losses, anything that might indicate it was happening again. And every few years there would be a report. Brief, usually buried in the local news section. Cattle found dead under mysterious circumstances. Always along or near the old San Antonio road. Always the same details. though the reporters who wrote about it now hadn't been alive in 1987, didn't know the history. The incidents were always ruled natural causes: predation, disease, lightning strikes. Official explanations that explained nothing. April 2023. Henry was having his morning coffee, scrolling through news on his tablet, when he saw it. 6 cattle dead in Madison County. The article included a statement from the Madison County Sheriff's Office. A 6-year-old Longhorn Cross cow found with its tongue removed by a straight, clean cut with apparent precision. 5 additional cattle discovered in neighboring Brazos and Robertson counties with similar mutilations. No signs of struggle. No predators scavenging the remains for several weeks. Cause of death unknown. Henry set down his coffee with shaking hands. He read the article 3 times, then searched for more coverage. Local stations had picked it up, then state news, then national. The same photos he remembered from 1987, just with better camera resolution. The same baffled quotes from law enforcement, the same lack of answers. He sat in his kitchen in Albuquerque and felt like he was 42 again, standing in Dale Hutchinson's pasture, breathing in that chemical smell, trying to understand something that defied understanding. That's when Henry decided to talk. He reached out to a retired deputy he'd kept in touch with, asked for contact information for someone who might listen, someone who wouldn't dismiss him as a crazy old man. The connection was made, arrangements were established, and for the first time in 37 years, Henry Morrow told the complete story of what happened in the spring of 1987. "People need to know," he said during the interview. "Something is out there along that old road. Has been for decades, maybe longer, maybe centuries. The Spanish missionaries might have seen it. The Indians before them. Every few years it comes back. Every few years it hunts. And we can't stop it because we don't understand what it is. We can barely perceive it. How do you fight something you can't even properly see?" Henry's final message is not a warning so much as a plea for caution. If you're driving through central Texas at night and you see the old San Antonio Road on your map, consider taking a different route. It might add 20 minutes to your drive, but those 20 minutes might save your life. If you're a rancher and you find cattle in a perfect circle, don't investigate alone. Don't assume it's predators or disease. Call the authorities and keep your distance. If you feel a sudden drop in temperature for no apparent reason, if the air starts to shimmer like heat waves on cold pavement, if you hear a high-pitched whine that makes your head hurt, get out of there. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to document it. Just leave. And if you see something tall that doesn't move right, something that makes your eyes refuse to focus, something that exists between one moment and the next without transition, do not look directly at it. Do not let it know you've noticed. Get in your vehicle, drive away calmly, and do not look back. Because if it sees you, if it knows you've witnessed it, you might end up like Leonard Pierce, or Russell Hayes, or any of the others who got too close. The official reports from 1987 are sealed. The Texas Rangers investigation files are classified. Requests under Freedom of Information laws have been denied, citing ongoing investigations, though what could still be ongoing after 37 years is anyone's guess. But Henry's copies still exist, hidden in that box in his garage. He's made arrangements for them to be donated to a research archive when he dies, to be made public. Photographs of those circles of dead cattle, their white eyes staring at nothing, temperature readings showing impossible drops, Leonard's note with its desperate scrawl, Russell's original statement describing what he saw. They're real, they're evidence, and they prove that something happened along that ancient trail in the spring of 1987. Something that law enforcement couldn't explain and couldn't stop. Something that defied every rational principle Henry had built his career on. The old San Antonio Road is still there, running through Madison, Robertson, and Brazos counties. It's been repaved in places, but the route hasn't changed. It still follows that same path the Indians used, that the Spanish missionaries walked, that countless people have traveled for hundreds of years. Ranchers still graze their cattle along its length. Families still drive it to get from one small town to another. And every few years, someone finds a perfect circle of death in their pasture. No blood, no evidence, no answers. Just fear and the knowledge that something is still out there, still hunting, still killing, still utterly beyond our understanding. This has been Void Case Files. If this story kept you up at night, please hit that subscribe button. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers by the new year, and we're bringing you new episodes every single day. Real mysteries, real terror, real cases that law enforcement couldn't solve. Share this with someone who appreciates the unexplained. Leave a comment telling us what you think really happened on the old San Antonio Road. And if you're from Madison, Robertson, or Brazos County, if you've seen something you can't explain, reach out. We want to hear your story. Until tomorrow, stay off the old roads, and if you find yourself on one anyway, keep your doors locked, your eyes forward, and whatever you do, don't stop for anything. Some things are better left undiscovered, some questions are better left unanswered, and some roads are better left untravelled. Good night, and stay safe out there.